everyone. Welcome to what is now the ninth Freethought History Webinar. I'm Daniel James Sharp. I'm the editor of the Freethinker and your host this evening. On the screen, you can see the title of tonight's talk, along with the Freethinkers' social media links and website link. So if you haven't already, please do check those out. So here's how this webinar will work. I'll hand off to our guest in just a moment, and he will speak for about half an hour, 40 minutes, or however long as he wants. And then we shall open it up to questions and discussion. Our guest tonight, speaking of him, is Barathy M.G, a doctoral student in history at Ashoka University in India. His research focuses on the intellectual history of religion and unbelief in colonial South Asia, with particular attention to the evolution of modern rationalist thought in the Tamil country between 1870 and 1930. He currently serves as an associate director of the International Society for Historians of Atheism, Secularism, and Humanism. Tonight, he shall be talking about the oft-forgotten links between British and Indian freethinkers and secularists, with a particular focus on National Secular Society founder Charles Bradlaugh. So with that, I shall hand off to you, Barathy, and thanks very much for doing this tonight.
Yeah, thank you so much. And hello, everyone. I'm Barathy, and thanks a lot for that kind introduction. I hope the screen is visible. Yeah, sure. So hello, everyone, and good evening. I thank the Freethinker UK magazine and organization and Daniel James Sharp for providing me an opportunity to address you all on one of the most important figures in free thought movement in the 19th century. I also thank Bob Forder, who is not here in this meeting, for introducing me to the editor of the magazine and providing me with a wonderful English lunch at his place. In this short lecture, I aim to introduce the listeners to Bradlaugh's twofold relationship with India. One, as a Republican politician and an MP who spoke for India at both the Houses of Commons and Indian nationalist movement, the Indian National Congress. And two, as a freethinker whose movement in the UK inspired several atheists, rationalists, and secularists to start their own movements in India. So these two identities, that is being a freethinker and being a Republican, exists in some sort of productive contradiction in one way or the other. While his representation as a member of India in the British Parliament received widespread attention, widespread praise, and near universal acclaim from the Indian public, his identity as an atheist and as a science promoter and as a freethinker did not bode well with a lot of Indian thinkers at that particular point of time. So what we have are two Bradlaughs. Both have close relationship with each other. The Republican identity and the free-thinking identity are quite inseparable in one or the other way, but his reception in India is dependent on these two identities existing in a separate manner. So I will be addressing both of these aspects in my short talk. Just to introduce Charles Bradlaugh, and I'll introduce him later too. He was a Liberal MP from Northampton. He became an international figure during this particular point of time. In 1866, he established the National Secular Society. It was one of the first nationally organized freethought organizations whose popularity spread throughout the world. Whenever Bradlaugh gives a lecture, hundreds of people thronged the venue to listen to him speak against religious establishments and monarchy. In the 1880s, he was elected as a Liberal MP from the Northampton constituency. His struggle to enter the parliament as an atheist who cannot affirm in the traditional sense of the term, it was a legendary struggle. He was disqualified for several consecutive times from the parliament, and he got re-elected again and again, and he finally took seat in 1886. His proposal to affirm and not take an oath became a law in England. This particular movement towards from an oath to affirmation became important in an indirect manner in India as well. As you see from the slides, these three figures, Jawaharlal Nehru, the first Prime Minister of India, when he took over, his prime ministership, he did not take an oath in the name of God. He affirmed solemnly to the Constitution of India. And the last person, C.N. Annadurai, he was the chief minister of the Tamil Nadu, the place I'm coming from. He was a product of an anti-caste, anti-religious association in southern India. When he was elected as chief minister, he chose to affirm in the name of conscience rather than God. So these people, and B.R. Ambedkar, one of the tallest leaders in the Indian Republic, an important Dalit leader and a framer of the Constitution, he also took oath in the name of Constitution rather than God. So these figures have been indirectly or directly impacted by Bradlaugh's political activism. Due to his impact, there were several secular societies that sprang up across the world. So that is what we'll be talking about. And a brief biographical sketch. He was initially a Sunday school teacher, and due to his inquisitive nature, he became an atheist. He had a brief stint in the army, and he was inspired by the secularist movement that was running around. I will briefly provide the history of secularist movement at a later point in the lecture. But for now, let's contend with his identity as an iconoclast in the magazine. And he started a Freethought publishing company, and he published Charles Knowlton's Fruits of Philosophy, which was a birth control pamphlet. It was seen as an obscene book charged with pornographic laws, and then it was a legendary struggle, Bradlaugh and Besant and the Queen. So Annie Besant, who was an important part of the Indian freedom movement from the 1890s, was initially an atheist and a socialist before converting to theosophy. They had a good relationship, and they both started the Malthusian League in 1877 and advocated birth control and identified overpopulation and too much of children as the cause of poverty. And his legendary struggle to enter into the parliament is well known. And he visited India in 1889 for a Congress session in December. So that is what I'll be focusing on the first part of the lecture. And when he sought to represent India, we have to consider the British Parliament structure at that particular point of time. Henry Fawcett was a radical member of Parliament who was the member of India. He spoke on the Indian affairs. And at a later point of time, after his death, Bradlaugh became interested in the Indian affairs, and he became a member of India. And in his wide stint as a member of Parliament, member of the House of Commons, he spoke out on several of the Indian issues regarding mining rights, regarding famine relief, and several other things. Generally, the biographers of Charles Bradlaugh consider his interest in India came only after his election to the member of Parliament after 1880s. But from the records that I have examined and exhumed through multiple other archival findings, I found that since 1874, through Freethought movements, he was interested in the Indian affairs. He spoke out against the misappropriation of famine relief funds. And in the 19th century was a period of several artificial famine created by the British colonialism. And he spoke out that, the famine relief funds are misused for war and annexation and the erection of costly buildings in Shimla. That is a hill station for British people, British officials, and for similar purposes, while the people of India have been starving. He also spoke out against the misappropriation of temple funds. Despite being an atheist, he spoke out against the misappropriation of temple funds for other purposes. And more importantly, the thing that endeared him among the Hindus of the particular period was that he spoke out against missionary excesses. So in the British, the British public will be providing their money to the Christian missionaries there, and then the missionaries will send abroad missions to India with lower level of conversion rates and several atrocities committed against people across the world. So he spoke out against that particular aspect of missionary excesses and the claim that the missionaries have come to civilize the natives of India, so on and so forth. He spoke out against these particular aspects which endeared him among the Hindu community. And this is where a Western Morning newspaper from England, said that Mr. Bradlaugh perhaps would take the government of India from the hands of Sir Stafford Northcote. He was the Secretary of State for India. His intelligence not being less, and his Catholicity in religious matters making him a more acceptable ruler to the mild but shrewd Hindu. In this talk, I'll be focusing on one particular aspect that is on his talk titled India, How We Obtained, How We Have Ruled It, and How It Should Be Ruled. It was delivered in 1883 at a Northampton public hall. So the general view of the rulers, British rulers at that particular point of time, especially after the massive revolt in 1857, was that our very existence in India depended upon the exclusion of the natives from the military and political power. We have won the empire of India by the sword, and we must preserve it by the same means. This was a former Governor General, Lord Ellenborough, speaking about the Indian affairs. And then, Bradlaugh replied, I am of the opinion that we have obtained our authority in India in great part by means of which we ought to be heartily ashamed. And I think if we continue to govern India, there is the weightiest duty upon every Englishman and Englishwoman to take care of the despotic authority of England shall be used as much as it can be to redeem our past and to make our Indian fellow citizens desirous of being governed by us. So from here, we could see that he was utilizing a version of a republicanism and he applied it to the Indian affairs. As we know, Bradlaugh was a supporter of Irish rights as well, and several other colonial empires as well. So he had a close relationship with Alexander Duff, the then Governor General of India, and there were continuous correspondences between them. So on the Indian affairs, he was very evocative, and he was considered a friend of India by several of the Indian intellectuals at that particular point of time. Though there were some minor oppositions to his views that it did not go that far, a majority of the Indian intellectuals at that particular point of time celebrated Bradlaugh for his stance on several colonial questions. He wanted the British government to pay attention to the people whom they are ruling, rather than concentrating upon the British residents in India. This was a perspective that Bradlaugh gave on the issue called as the Ilbert Bill, where the Indian judges will be able to adjudicate several issues for the British public in the India as well. So against this, there was a huge uproar among the British civil servants and others. So Bradlaugh supported the Indian judges being able to adjudicate on British affairs as well. And he spoke out against overtaxation of land, of zamindari land and of raitwari land in India. And he spoke out against the artificially constructed famine. And he said that several of the Indians, despite being involved in mutiny and several others, a lot of educated Indians are supporters of the empire. And hence, the British should not use force, rather persuade them to join hands for a good governance. And of course, there are problems within this particular point of view because he was a supporter of empire, but he was a supporter of benevolent empire, which ultimately would raise the Indians to the standards of the British. Though there are problems within it, we are speaking in the period of 19th century, about which we'll cover later. And at that particular point of time, the civil service examinations were conducted in Britain. For Indians to be part of the administration, they have to travel to Britain all over and then write exams. So Bradlaugh and several other people have supported such exams to be conducted in India. And he spoke out about the impeachment of Clive and Hastings, about the vast corruption that the British officials committed in the India. And he said, in a most beautiful manner, if the mutiny is wicked, then our repression of the mutiny is cruel, murderous, and abominable. And and a beautiful piece of rhetorical excess, he says, and I say without fear of contradiction that our past in India had been so shameful, so tainted with crime, or marked with dishonor, that if it were the history of any other people, every English orator on every platform would denounce it with the strongest words of castigation and shame. And when the British government committed mass atrocities, the people of Chittagong wickedly resisted. We burned 1 or 2 places of the coast in order to show them that they ought to appreciate the advantages of a civilization we brought them, in full irony and sarcasm. And he spoke about these very notion of the Western Enlightenment bringing civilization to the uneducated natives. He was making fun of that despite being part of the Western Enlightenment tradition. There is a contradiction that even Karl Marx also incorporates in his writing. Even though he was part of Enlightenment, he opposed certain Enlightenment excesses that resulted in colonialism and others. And finally, he said that they want to raise Indians to the level of fullest self-government. He was supporter of self-government, and he looked at the rule in India with some sort of shame. And there is a chance to redeem if India has been India is ruled properly. So that is his general view on Indian affairs, and he reiterated this points several times throughout his career in his speeches in the Parliament and in his speeches in the General Assembly. And in 1889, he had the opportunity to travel to India despite his poor health. He attended a Congress session in 1889 December. That conference was particularly popularly called as Bradlaugh Congress among the Indians. I have found several Tamil records which said that during the time of Bradlaugh Congress. And beautiful presents, I mean, absolutely beautiful presents were given to him, and several demands were written to him in the beautiful presents. And he said that the poor Hindu folk seemed inclined to almost worship me. It was true that Bradlaugh was worshipped among the Indian intellectuals because he was one of the very few representatives who spoke for India, and only one of the very, very few people who spoke for India in the parliament. He was a person in power, and hence his reception was multifold. Great reception was given. And he spoke on decentralization of administration while he was in India. And at a later point of time, he tried to introduce a bill, which was later defeated, and another bill was introduced, but that's a long story. But he wanted to increase the power of provincial government rather than the imperial center. And he wanted Indians to be admitted more in the civil service, administrative positions. And he was moving towards home rule within the British Dominion. So we do not know what would have been his reception. I mean, what would have been his thoughts at a later point of his life, if he had lived far away. I mean, if he had lived more than what he had, but he moved towards home rule. So these are some of the flashy things that I found in British and Chennai archives. So these are demands, in beautiful presents, and some of them are in silk cloth. These are the beautiful presents, and I'll show some of the pictures. Some are for famine relief, and the Indian representatives decided to, quote this in very sugary manner. And these are ivory, sandalwood, and beadery style of art, which we could find in Deccan region of India. The sandalwood still smells the same. And this is if we could see the corners, it is made of silk and other stuff. And these are the scrolls which was presented to him. And let me move on to another aspect. And finally, we'll talk about how these two aspects, are coordinated in a particular manner. Then we move on to Bradlaugh's free thought. In the West, in England particularly, there were, multiple people, who were responsible for instigating modern free thought. The rediscovery of classical antiquity of Greek and Roman literature and art. With that, there was a thought of a renaissance, of bringing back some of the greatest arts and greatest sciences of the past. With the Reformation, the idea about what constituted true belief and true religion came into question. Through the gradual development of scientific inquiry, humanity's understanding of the physical universe and of its own place within the grand universe underwent a profound change. The scientific revolution, most commonly associated with the 16th and 17th centuries, played a seminal role in reshaping how humans conceived of Earth in relation to other celestial bodies. The story of how, Copernicus, Galileo, Kepler, and Newton revolutionized the field of astronomy and physics, it's too familiar to bear repetition here. Finally, Darwin's majestic Origin of Species was published in 1859. It consolidated scientific naturalism as a powerful worldview. Now, what is scientific naturalism? It means that it is possible to understand the world without having any recourse to supernatural or extra divine explanation. Through empirical observation and research, it is possible to understand any natural phenomena. This is scientific naturalism. This changed how the people viewed themselves during the Enlightenment era. On the other hand, with the knowledge gained from colonialism and the exploration of the world, the West came into deeper contact with other religions of the world. Hence, there was a need to reassess the truthfulness of Christianity as it claimed that it is the one true religion. Through development of academic departments such as history, anthropology, comparative religion, and others, Christianity became yet another religion and not the true religion. And hence, Christianity was studied in comparison with other religions of the world. So this created a great moment for different movements, for instance, deism, pantheism, and other spiritualist movements as well in the West. In the beginning of the 19th century, several atheists or infidel movements flourished in the West, especially in England. Some of the most important names associated with the movements were Thomas Paine, Richard Carlile, Robert Owen, George Jacob Holyoake. And Holyoake also becomes important to our story. He was one of the most fierce proponents of free thought, but he was dissatisfied with the terms such as infidel and atheist because it carried negative connotations towards morality. Because we have experienced, right, atheism is seen as an immoral institution because religion provides us with a sense of morality. So taking his cue from multiple movements at that particular point of time, he repurposed the term secularism to mean non-religious activism. Secularism in his vocabulary means this worldly affairs rather than against the otherworldly or afterlife. He established the London Secular Society in 1853. And Bradlaugh was initially part of the London Secular Society. And then the next decade, in 1860s, Bradlaugh came on his own. And with the arrival of Bradlaugh, secularism became a more national and a global affair. He established the Malthusian League in 1870, and 1870s and advocated birth control. Annie Besant was also a crucial part in this Malthusian movement. Nationwide organizations, nationwide lectures were organized by the people, and it was primarily working class and the middle class movement. The upper class movements, upper class people were wary of joining a secularist movement, which is considered amoral or immoral. And in India, several branches were established. Some of the most important branches are Calcutta, Behrampur in current-day Odisha, Faizabad, Bombay, Hyderabad, and Madras. These are some of the most prominent cities in India. So an association was established in 1878 called as the Hindu Freethought Union. It was later renamed as the Madras Secular Society. And Hindu Freethought Union was founded mainly by non-Brahmin people, non-Brahmin men who are educated in higher education mostly. And to understand this sort of movement in India, we have to understand the context of India as well. In the 19th century, India was burning with the coming of new ideas of selfhood, nationhood, freedom from both political and social hegemony and oppression. The missionaries and native elites competed with each other in providing education to the people. So several higher education institutions and universities were set up by the middle of the 19th century. More important for our purposes, newspapers and periodicals in native languages began to spring up from this period. Voluntary organizations took up the question of social, religious, and political freedoms. The Brahmo Samaj of Calcutta took up the question of widow burning, widow remarriage, and caste system. They premised their religion with a blend of native Hindu philosophies, Unitarianism, and sort of deistic understanding from the West and formulated their belief. Similarly, there is another association called as Arya Samaj, which premised their reform and religion based on the infallibility of ancient scriptures called as the Vedas. And there were several lower caste movements as well. They counted the very basis of Hinduism and sought to liberate the lower caste communities from the clergy and upper caste domination. Thomas Paine's works provided philosophical basis for one intellectual and activist called as Jyotirao Phule, who sought to liberate the lower caste communities from the shackles of Hindu religious theology. And yes, there were several associations that took up the question of caste and women question. So, as you can see from here, the periodicals of Holyoke and Bradlaugh were read and distributed in the 1850s throughout the cities of Indian subcontinent, in Bombay, in Madras, and Calcutta, and others, leading to the establishment of many secular and free thought organizations in India. That's how the Freethought Union, Hindu Freethought Union, came to be. So it propagated the messages of rationalism, secularism, anti-caste thought and atheism, female education and emancipation. As you can see from here, these are some of the books that were published by the Hindu Freethought Union. Ingersoll's work, Ingersoll, and several works of G.W. Foote, Annie Besant, and others. And these were some of the papers available in Madras at that particular point of time. This was taken, I think, in 1882. And it says that, you can send a letter to us so that we can provide the National Reform and other newspapers to you as well. And there were several translations of the articles from National Reformer, Freethinker, and Secular Review in the newspapers that I'll be discussing. It sought to establish its own, the Hindu Freethought Union and later Madras Secular Society, it sought to establish its own atheism or its own secularism, because it combined several Indian sources of heterodox materialism, such as Charvaka, Lokayata, and from other heterodox religions such as Jainism and Buddhism, and combined it with atheism and free thought of the West. So it is a unique blend. And in several of the writings on science, you could see several scientific materialist articles written in the language of traditional materialism, where they discuss, several Indic understanding of what constitutes the body, what constitutes the world, so on and so forth. If we have time, we can speak about that as well. And it published 2 weeklies called as Tattva Vivesini, which could be translated as Philosophical Inquirer in Tamil and The Thinker in English. And it entered into polemical wars with all religious sects. You name anything, Hinduism, if we take Hinduism, Brahmanism, Shaivism, Vaishnavism, and if you take Islam, it spoke out against Islam. If you take against, Christianity, they spoke out against missionaries, and there were several back and forth with the missionaries all throughout the presidency. And even the newly established Theosophical Society was not left out. I know that, at a later point of time, Annie Besant converted to Theosophy, and it's so sad that we have records only till 1888. So the association started in 1878 November, and we do not have the date of end. The only available records are till 1888. But from other sources, I can see that the association continued till 1890, though we are not sure of what the activities were after 1888. And more importantly, this created a huge controversy and huge unpopularity with the Christians and the Hindus as well. But the Hindu apologists were not wary of taking several free thought ideas and use it in their opposition to Christian missionaries. So it was an interesting blend in the 19th century. So the Theosophical Society provided fodder for the Hindu apologists, and the free thought movement, which opposed Hinduism, also provided fodder for anti-Christian feelings. So it's an interesting, array of, people at that particular point of time. So the Madras Secular Society remains unique in many ways. It created considerable anxiety among both Christian missionaries and Hindu Orthodox circles. Whereas, as I said, the other branches in Calcutta, it was mostly anti-Christian. In Faizabad, it was mostly anti-Christian. In Hyderabad, there were some people who critique Hinduism. There were against Hindu religious excesses in all these newspapers, but the primary aim of these other branches in Madras, it's different. In Madras, they were more focused on local issues rather than countering missionaries per se. Yeah, and here we can see one particular person from Brahmo Samaj speak out against materialist philosophy. He spoke out against atheism, and he said that monotheism is the rational religion rather than atheism. And he said that atheism is a dangerous thought that would destroy the Hindu thought world. So since he is a Brahmo Samaji, since he is a person who, from an association which united some form of deism with Unitarian beliefs and philosophy, he says both deism and theism are one. And he compiled all the other philosophies such as atheism, materialism, and skepticism into one. And at a later point of time, rationalism will also become one with atheist movement. And he mentions several influential people, and Bradlaugh becomes yet another important person. And Bradlaugh was countered in the most brutal manner by the Hindu apologists at that particular point of time, while some of the people from the same Hindu associations celebrated Bradlaugh for his political support of India. So this is the contradiction which I'll come to later. And this is a record. Oh God, I forgot to. Yeah, sorry for the less amount of clarity. This is the Tattva Vivesini newspaper, the Philosophical Enquirer. In it, there is an article on Charles Bradlaugh. When Charles Bradlaugh was not allowed to take seat in the parliament, several Indian writers and Indian thinkers supported Charles Bradlaugh on his mission, and they sent a lot of letters to Charles Bradlaugh and to the National Reformer, and the articles were published. And this is a list of some 30 to 35 free thinkers from India who supported Charles Bradlaugh for his fight against bigot to aid his entry into the parliament, because at the time, Charles Bradlaugh was asking funds for it. And the Indian free thinkers also sent money to G.W. Foote when he was imprisoned. And this is an advertisement for the Thinker, the English newspaper. And interestingly, it says that theologically it is atheist, philosophically it's positivist, and it is utilitarian in its moral, and economically they are Malthusian. And again, Malthusian comes with its own set of problems. Just a second. Daniel, how much time do I have?
About 10 minutes, or as much as you want, really.
Yeah, sure. I'll complete within that particular time period. Yeah. So what are the objectives of the Madras Secular Society? Number one, to promote secular principles and to protect secular freedoms. And number two, the promotion of worldview based on this worldly needs and necessities. So again, the meaning of secularism, according to them, according to Holyoke, was considered as this worldly. And similarly, in Tamil, there is, the Tamil translation for the term is Laukika, which is actually a Sanskrit word, which is converted to mean this worldly in Tamil. And there is an explanation, a lot of explanation on the meaning of atheism, on the meaning of materialism, on the meaning of scientific principles, and on the meaning of this worldliness. So they said that the duty of secularism is to promote worldview that is based on this worldly needs and necessities of human being. A secularist, a Laukiki, has to acknowledge and appreciate this worldly philosophies. In matters concerning this world, one should not take any decision based on religion. The duty of the secularist is to maximize the happiness and comfort of the people of the world and follow the maxim, the greatest happiness of greatest number rather than the pleasure of the mightiest. As we can see, the greatest happiness of the greatest number is the watchword of utilitarian philosophy, and there were a lot of articles which spoke on utilitarianism as well. And to formulate some sort of secularist ethics. So what does secularist ethic mean in 19th century Tamil country? Setting a minimum age for marriage. Since there were a lot of child marriages happening at that particular point of time, there were huge discussion on setting a minimum age for marriage. They supported widow remarriage, rejecting immoral activities like drinking, gambling that destroys families, maintaining impartiality, loving everyone equally, yearning for justice, respecting individual dietary practices, whether it is vegetarian or non-vegetarian, and cultivating pure thoughts. So these were some of the secular ethics that is discussed in Tattva Vivesini, because of the main complaint that there is nothing called as an atheist ethic. There is nothing called as a secular ethic, because they were seen as oxymorons or something. To abolish immoral institutions such as caste system and women's oppression. So this is what I'll be focusing on now before concluding. We do not have much information on the members of the association. We have the very short obituary of one person and a short biography of one or two persons. Most of the articles are undersigned by initials: CJ, MM, D, C, and these are the initials, that were there. And most of the articles are sometimes unsigned as well. Sometimes there will be beautiful pseudonyms such as Veritas, which is the Latin word for truth. And there is a Veritas in National Reformer as well and in Freethinker as well. Oh, that is not the same Veritas. This is a Indian Veritas. And Truth Seeker, Anti-Theosophist, Friend of India, and so on. From the few names that we could gather, we can conclude that it was predominantly run by non-Brahmin intelligentsia who are mostly educated in English and studied in the Madras University. And from the sources that I could gather, all of them were men. I could not find any woman in this movement. And this is the same situation all across the world. I mean, mostly it will be men who will be dominating the associations. There will be exceptional women like Annie Besant and others. But I mean, it will be mostly men who decide on the policies and others. They were some of the first to offer a systemic critique of caste system in the modern period from a non-Brahmin perspective. I mean, the Christian missionaries have advanced several anti-caste critique, but within the non-Brahmins, these were some of the first, critique of caste system. And for those who are unknown about Indian affairs, let me briefly summarize about caste system. Caste indicates an endogamous social groups consisting of multiple subgroups or subcastes. The composition of castes varies according to each geographical region within India. Varna is a notional hierarchical system with the hierarchical ordering of caste. It is mentioned in ancient Hindu texts. So it is comprised of 4 occupational groups: Brahmins, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, and Shudras. Priests, warriors, traders, and servants. And finally, there are people outside the caste system, outside the Varna system. They are called as Dalits or untouchables. There is inhuman oppression meted out to those in the lower ends of the hierarchy, who are the majority in the Indian subcontinent. And the secularists advocated abolition of caste system and rejected Hinduism that provided theological justifications for it. The seculars sought to abolish caste system and posit an alternative ethical framework premised upon free thought and atheism. This aspect distinguishes the Madras Secular Society from all its predecessors, contemporaries, and successors till about 1920s, when there is another rationalist organization called as the Self-Respect Movement that carried on its mantle. The Madras Secular Society drew on both colonial and indigenous sources to articulate an anti-caste rationalism that not just rejected religious authority, but rejected social hierarchies that is sacralized by the religion. The Madras Freethinkers criticized the Brahmins and upper caste landed communities who benefited from the social hierarchy and asked for redistribution of wealth, land, and status. And taking cue from modern scholarship on philology at that particular point of time in the 19th century, these intellectuals were mostly reading some second-hand information from philologists. So it won't be as perfect and scientifically accurate as we expect them to be. Besides, we do not need to know sociological or historical truths from these activists. We can know about the method through which they articulated their rationalism or atheism. There they argued that the Brahmins invaded the country and subjugated the native population. Brahmins came from the region called as Iran, and then they subjugated the indigenous community and made them into lower castes. The Brahmins invented the caste system to divide and discriminate people and rule out any possibility of unity after that. And here, the freethinkers, the Madras freethinkers, in a beautiful rhetorical prose, they say that caste prevents cooperation between humans. Caste prevents one to help a fellow in the need. Caste prevents one to look at the disasters caused by poverty and hunger, but it makes you carry the Brahmin overhead. Caste prevents you from helping a fellow traveler to quench his thirst. Caste prevents you from helping a helpless lower caste child who fell into a well accidentally. To restore unity is to abolish caste. It prevents natural emotions and feelings such as compassion, mercy, and kindness. So this rhetorical brilliance will be later carried on by, this sort of anticipates several tall figures in the 20th century, such as Periyar and Ambedkar, who articulated a version of rationalism and anti-caste life in the later period of time. And then, the second moment that I want to focus on is women's question. And they supported, as I said, women's education, widow remarriage, and raise the marriage, a marriageable age of women children. There, another powerful rhetorical piece is what I want to focus on. In the West, you might be familiar with the abolitionists. Most of them were believing Christians and preachers. They based their abolitionist philosophy based on the humanity of enslaved people and the divinity that resides within them. Christian message of equality and dignity propelled them into arguing passionately for the cause of the enslaved. In that moment, there were also some secular and atheist abolitionists who argued for the abolition of slavery. They respected the religious abolitionists, but denied the biblical basis. In fact, according to them, the Bible is the one that causes the religious people to go out there and enslave people. The atheists noted that modern humanism is the value through which the very notion of slavery could be abolished. I'm not here to value judge either of them. Both their works are very important. I'm not here to value judge. I'm merely stating that this was a rhetorical strategy adapted by the atheists at that particular point of time. Let's move back to Madras. In the 1880s, there were several progressive reform organizations that took up the cause of women. For instance, as I said earlier, widow remarriage, abolition of child marriage. But they based these reforms based on Hindu holy texts, despite drawing their ideas from modern period and modern humanism. Several of the reformers based their reforms on the basis of Hindu holy books. They argued that in the Vedas, in the ancient Hindu texts, in the ancient Hindu period, there were no widow, burning. The widows were allowed to remarry, and the children were educated, so on and so forth. They premised based on an utopian construction of past, which may or may not be there. But the atheists brought out, some most important perspectives. Again, I'm not here to value judge those reformers as well, but the Madras atheists question this particular kind of logic. We are extremely respectful of the things that the Hindu widow reformer organization does. We are thankful to them. But let me ask this question. Why do the women get subjugated? What religion prescribed widows to burn themselves after their husband's death? What religion asked to treat people differently based on their birth? What tradition holds women as inferior beings? What made the parents to marry off these women so early in their lives? Why should such reform be based upon an archaic religious text? Their morality should derive from basic humanity and modern principles. This was the unique understanding at that particular point of time, that instead of deriving your morality and ethics on the basis of humanism, on the basis of ancient religious texts or archaic religious texts, you could base your principles on the basis of modern humanism and even unbelief. So these are some unique permutations and combinations that the atheists tried at that particular point. These are some of the texts that were published. And the last one is a poem written in honor of Bradlaugh when he passed away. I found this in Madras, in one of the archives in Chennai. London. I'm sorry. And there is a Tamil version of it. And it's a huge poem. We do not have time for it. This is a poem. That's it. And some final thoughts on Bradlaugh in India and how we could evaluate Bradlaugh at this particular juncture. See, both of them, be it Bradlaugh or the Madras Secular Society, have their own limitations because of the period they are in, the people whom they are in contact with, so on and so forth. Bradlaugh received most of his information on India in the British newspapers, in the discussion in the parliament, and in the reports that he had access to, which portrayed India in a particular way, which portrayed the freedom movement in India in a particular way. But at the same time, we also have to keep in mind that in the 19th century, the notion of total independence was unheard of in India. There were no imagination. There were imagination among small pockets of people, but that particular imagination of complete freedom from the British did not take hold at that particular point. Even the most famous, nationalists at that particular point of time argued for more control in ruling themselves. So the British colonial excesses were criticized on the very basis that it is so un-British. So, The Poverty and Un-British Rule of India is a famous book by Dadabhai Naoroji, one of the early proponents of nationalism. He said that the British rule in India did not accord with the principles of rule of law and justice, which is promised by the British. It is so un-British. So the Britishness is associated with the rule of law and justice, and hence the rule in India is un-British and unjust. So within that particular period, Bradlaugh's movement towards home rule, towards something that is giving more rights to the Indians was exceptional. And that is why we see a lot of Indians supporting Bradlaugh like anything. And even after his death, there were several Indian people who attended his funeral. And one among them was a future great leader, Mohandas K. Gandhi. Similarly, during the 19th century, there were limits in free thought perspectives also, which we have come away from. It looked upon women as being more religious than men, women being more emotional than men. So the views from which we have the views from which we have unlearned and disassociated ourselves from those views. So these views were part and parcel of the 19th century. With that in mind, to commemorate or to remember Bradlaugh in this particular juncture is to remember his struggle for free thought, for freedom of religion, and freedom of press. Even while supportive of the empire, he could be seen as part of a progressive bunch which took republicanism to another level by supporting the Indian cause. Though I critique the views that Bradlaugh supported empire, so on and so forth, this is a modern critic. But keeping Bradlaugh and others in that particular period, we could at least understand where they are coming from. Finally, I just have a small comment on this. The consideration of what constitutes this life and afterlife became one of the major considerations of the free thought movement in the 19th century. And in the 20th century, this was taken up by several other activists, as I said earlier, who took on this particular notion from its primitive formulation to a more coherent thought process. So the 19th century thought process at this particular point of time was a bit limited because they were some of the first people who experimented with new sciences, new thoughts, and new processes. And to remember Bradlaugh is to remember the experiments and imagination of people associated with him who sought to build a world without religion. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Barathy. I should say to everyone here that it's actually nearly midnight in Delhi where Barathy is, so he's very committed to giving this talk. So thanks, double thanks to him. So if anyone has any questions or points that they wish to raise, we've got about 10 minutes. Just use the raise hand function or wave wildly, and I'll try and catch you. Charles.
I lectured for Humanist UK on Bradlaugh's struggle to get into Parliament, and I didn't know anything about his influence on Indian sexualism, and that is a fascinating talk and widened my perspective on Bradlaugh. And he was a very persistent man, and he struggled to get into Parliament, and he was determined to represent his people. And so I think this is a fascinating widening of Bradlaugh's influence. Thank you.
Thanks, Charles. Shall move on to Akash.
Can you guys hear me? You guys hear me?
Yep.
Thanks for the talk, Barathy. It was a really good talk. I had one question about what your, I guess, analysis of the free thought movement in modern day India is in comparison to the historical legacy, I guess, because as I see it nowadays, there's not that much, or not as much as there used to be, a kind of general societal focus on even just secularism, let alone free thought. I mean, the far right in India are doing a lot to dismantle the secular legacy. What's your, I guess, vision of the future of free thought in India?
Right. Thanks for the question. And there is a difference between, the 19th century free thought and the 20th century and 21st century free thought even. Because of the arrival of socialist movements, now the free thought movements in the 20th century were not merely free thought movements. They were associated with one political idealism or the other, just like how Bradlaugh's political movement and his free thought career was united. In the 20th century, several science movements, several science popularization movements, and small movements to eradicate superstitions. There were several movements that happened in the 20th century that were associated with one or the other political ideology, such as left movements or Dravidian movement. And in many other parts of India, there were individual movements who associated themselves with progressive politics, but not so much politics. As such, in Maharashtra and in Andhra Pradesh and in many other regions in India, there were movements in the 20th century. But the content of the movement moved moved in a different direction. About science vans were part of it, and then they were conducting scientific experiments and against new age movements as well. And in the 21st century, especially after the new atheist movement by, I forgot his name, Dawkins, right? Richard Dawkins, yeah. Richard Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens, and because of their documentaries becoming so popular, it took hold among some amount of people who are well versed with English. So the English speaking people who are one way or the other, elite in a monetary term or cultural term, they are, now part of, there is a new atheist movement developing, and there is an old atheist movement also. So the old atheist movements are struggling for funds, whereas in the new atheist movement is using some sort of neoliberal ways to, there will be T-shirts designed, and then, there will be posters and others, which the early free thought movement could not manage because of the lack of funds. And in other parts, the free thought movement has lost its glory in the late 20th century because of several other political movements coming into fore in that manner. But there were left organizations which took on the free thought ideas further. Yeah. It's a huge discussion, but I'm reading and writing on that particularly. But this is the short answer that I could manage. And thanks for the question, Akash.
Thank you.
And and especially with the right wing on the rise, there were, in 2014, a free thinker was killed. So it's more dangerous now to be a free thinker. That too, a free thinker who advocates a particular version of free thought, who counters superstition and who counters. Narendra Dabholkar is that person. There is a wonderful book by Mohandas K on Narendra Dabholkar when he was alive. It's called as Disenchanting India, I think. Disenchanting India. So he spoke with Narendra Dabholkar, and we have seen documentaries of him, and several atheist movements, were inspired by Narendra Dabholkar also. With the rise of right wing, it becomes increasingly difficult to speak about it and to research on that. But anyway, thank you.
Yeah, I often think a refrain that I keep making these days is that both the world's oldest secular democracy, that is the USA, and the world's largest secular democracy, that is India, seem hell-bent on getting rid of secularism and democracy, but that would take us too far afield. Nathan?
Thank you for the talk. Super interesting. I guess my own research, I found that Bradlaugh was somewhat interested in scientific racism at the time, although it didn't seem to, stop him in any way from, empathizing with people in India or elsewhere in the kind of British imperial system. I'm just wondering, if you came across any more details about Bradlaugh's like discussion about race, or I mean, also I just see a question in the chat kind of similarly, like among the Indian secular societies, if you see them kind of challenging racism or things, or you know, in some way confronting it or whatever. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Nathan. And I mean, your work, frames a major part in the chapter that I'll be writing soon. Where are you? Yeah, here, yeah. Your work will frame a major part in. You've written an amazing work. Thank you for that. And it's true. I mean, as you say in your work, despite being some sort of, in the 19th century own way, he supported Malthusianism in the particular sense. And then, Malthusianism comes with its own problem in the later period. Malthusianism combines with epigenetics and so on and so forth. And Bradlaugh had an early version of that, but that particular idea did not stop him from supporting something, progressive or supporting Indian people in that particular sense. We have several records of people, in India as well, who sort of even in the works that I'm discussing, they have a particular version in their ideal, but their activism or their acts do not support their ideals. I do not know any. I do not know the connection between that as yet. I'm reading on that actually. But on the question of how Bradlaugh has written about India and how he views India, not particularly Bradlaugh. Bradlaugh has written a few articles on Freethought movement in India. He supports the Freethought movement in India, but there are other people, for instance, Foote and others, who has written. It's a funny anecdote, but that will provide an explanation. In an anecdote, he says, a white missionary has come to India, and then he is spewing. I'm sorry to use this, spewing Christian nonsense. Whereas there are freethinkers in India, who came from Hindu religion. And in short, the article says that the white man behaves like a savage, and the savage. He does not use these words particularly. And the savage behaves like a white man as a gentleman, who uses that particular verse. When he does not use this, I'm attributing the savage to them. Don't cite me on this. But the thing is, there were this particular view. A person from India becoming a free thinker is a huge deal for people like Bradlaugh and Besant, 1870s Besant and 1880s Besant, and G.W. Foote and others, that they support that particular version. And there are several articles which speak that, Hinduism is full of obscenities and superstitions, but do not leave that religion for more obscene and more superstitious Christianity. So these were the kinds of writings that the atheists and secularists wrote on the papers that I am looking at. I have not come across any political version of it as yet, which speaks about race and others, in a more pointed way as such. But from this indication, what we could understand is that there is some sort of paternalism that the British freethinkers, had for the Indian freethinkers at that particular point. Yeah, and there were, on the other hand, in the Malthusian League, we find a lot of Madras people. Chennai. The Southern Indian people participating in the Malthusian League. There were doctors, lawyers, and others, and one of them is a physicist who later became Buddhist. So there were conversions and reconversions at that particular point. But what I'm trying to say is that the Malthusian idea were utilized by these people in a very different manner. Here, the ideas became not a racist, but very classist. So again, Malthusianism blames the poor people for their poverty in one way. I mean, in a very simplistic way. It's more complicated than that. I'm sorry, but since it blames that, and there are beautiful rhetorical pieces as well. One of the articles says that the poor have no childhood. So that sort of evocative descriptions are there, but it is more classist than racist in this particular context. But thank you, and thank you for your work, Nathan.
Thank you.
All right. I think well, it's about 8 or 12:30 for you, Baraty. Are you happy to take these two last questions?
Sure.
Great. Okay, Andrew. Oh,
you're unmuted. Muted.
Yeah, I hope you can now hear me.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Baraty, for your talk and for staying up so very late to make the presentation. Bradlaugh, I think, was the first serving member of the House of Commons to attend an annual session of the Indian National Congress, which makes all the more remarkable. But what puzzles and intrigues me is a few years ago, I was able to visit the Bradlaugh Hall in Lahore, which was built 10 years after Bradlaugh's death. And the local versions are that it was built after Bradlaugh visited Lahore, but he didn't. And he only made one visit to India. He only went to what's now Mumbai. So why is there a Bradlaugh Hall in Lahore?
Right. So for that, 1 second, I'll have to plug in the charger. Yeah. So the thing is, so if I could quickly go back to that slide that I was showing. 1 second. I'm sorry to go back. Okay, but I'll take another question and I'll finally present it. And it's a very short answer, but yeah, Robin, please go ahead.
I just wanted to say, I think your talk was really good, and thank you for that. I have some areas of interest with Bradlaugh. For example, his association with socialism. He was a member of the International Working Men's Association, together with Karl Marx, and they had quite heated debates about the Paris Commune. And you mentioned Annie Besant several times. They were very close, the two of them, and she was quite clearly a socialist and supported the matchmakers of women as well as being a suffragette. And I think many of his ideas were socialist, although he quite vehemently denied being a socialist. I think that the two run quite closely in line. And just one thing with Malthus, I think in the early days, Malthus was seen as a scientist and bringing rational thought to population. And I suspect the decision for Annie Besant and Bradlaugh to publish The Fruits of Philosophy, which was actually about family planning, was partly, motivated by Malthus's ideas. And as far as I understand, it wasn't racially based or necessarily on income. It was just a calculation that if the population keeps increasing, it'll create poverty and famine and so on. And now with climate change, the same arguments are arising again, because the amount of energy and that's needed is to maintain a growing population is a problem. But what we're finding now is that education usually helps reduce population size. So and I think Bradlaugh was going in the right direction with publishing The Fruits of Philosophy. Just an incidental mention. And my grandfather father's grandfather was Charles Bradlaugh.
Yeah, I thought so. Your name was Bonner. Yeah,
Yeah, you got right.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I mean, honored to meet you today. So to quickly go back to the slides that I was showing, thanks a lot, Andrew. I read your piece, and I think you were the one who wrote the piece on Bradlaugh's Bradlaugh Hall in Lahore. It's a beautiful piece. Thank you. So the ways that certain names keep traveling places and certain names giving legitimacy to certain causes is very important in history writing and history exercises as such. So the several of the gifts that I have shown did not come from Bombay. Several people have carried such huge costly materials from ivory, gold, silver plated things to Bradlaugh, and then they gave it to him. And then in commemoration of Bradlaugh's service to India, there were multiple similar gifts that were sent to, what's Bradlaugh's wife's name? I'm sorry, I forgot. Hypatia was his daughter. I think it was sent to Hypatia, right? I think the gifts were sent to Hypatia. I'm not sure. I'm not remembering the archive correctly. I'll have to go back. Several costly items were sent to Hypatia at that particular point. And he represented Kashmir issues. I mean, in the 1880s, not the modern Kashmir issue, which was a huge deal in India and Pakistan. At the time, there was no Pakistan, 1890s, 1880s. But the Lahore Hall was constructed during 1920s or 30s, right? Voice, please.
I think it was earlier. I think it was opened in 1900.
Yeah. It was in 1900. So at that particular point in the 19th century, some of the most famous British men, British people, included Annie Besant and Bradlaugh. Annie Besant in a very different manner because she supported Indian nationalism and she became part of the Theosophical movement. And then later part in 1915 and 16, she became part of the Home Rule movement along with Indian people. Of course, later she was replaced by Mahatma Gandhi. And that's another story. Besant is another story altogether. But then, Bradlaugh was the most famous person in the 19th century. In the 20th century and in the later part of 20th century, Bradlaugh was practically forgotten by the Indian nationalists and others. But this was a period when he was at the peak of his popularity, and giving his name would act as a source of legitimation as well. And the popular stories associated with Bradlaugh or any other person is that there are famous stories of Tagore and Indian poet Rabindranath Tagore and Tolstoy meeting, but they never met. So these stories have a way of legitimizing a colonized country. So we have to understand the psyche of the oppressed in that particular context, and then what lends legitimacy to people in that sense. And similarly, Gandhi's name was also used in a different manner by people who have never met Gandhi. And these are different stories, and that's the story that's there. And Bradlaugh Hall, because as you know already, Bradlaugh was one of the most popular persons among the Indian intelligentsia in the 19th century. And thanks a lot. And yeah, sorry, was that Professor Royal? I heard some voice. Okay, fine. Anyway, and thanks a lot, Robin Bonner. Glad to meet you. And I did not say that, I should have made my point clear about Malthusianism. Malthusianism meant different things in different period of time. In the 19th century, early part of the 19th century, when Malthus was alive, it meant a different thing. And in 1856, after the publication of Origin of Species, it became an entirely different thing. And several science historians have mentioned about this, Darwin taking his insights from an economic theory, and then, writing his Origin of Species and this theory of natural selection and so on and so forth. And late 19th century, it became a sort of scientific way of understanding population and others. And yes, the Malthusian ideas and neo-Malthusianism changed its form based on the people who handle it. The feminists also used Malthusianism as a way to advocate for contraceptions and birth controls and others, which had a progressive bent. And it was used by racists. It had a regressive bent. But on the whole, I mean, there were huge debates about the truthfulness of Malthusianism, and that is where initially when whenever Malthusianism is popularly used, it is usually used against the poor people and considers poor people as the reasons for that. It is a very simplified version, but in most popular discourses is what I'm saying. And the scientific races used it on different races and in different manners. And yes, true, it led to some progressive ideals as well. So that is, I'm sure that, and thanks for bringing the point. Yeah. And I want to thank Professor Edward Royal here. I wanted to finally thank him. And because of his cataloging, brilliant cataloging, and his continuous help, I was able to access more records than I actually planned while I was in London. So hi, Professor Royal. Good to meet you here.
All right, I think that's about time then. Yeah, we're well over time, and you probably need to get to bed, Barathy. So then again, yeah. So thank you again, Barathy. Thank you very much, and thanks everyone for coming along and joining us. Keep an eye on the website. We've got a new webinar coming next month on Ernestine Rose, a little known feminist and freethinker. I'll see you all then, I hope, and have a good evening / night / morning or whatever it is where you are.